There was a man named Joe who worked as a mechanic in a quiet, snow-covered town. Joe wasn't rich. In fact, he barely earned enough to make it through each week. His garage was old, with creaking walls and a leaking roof, and the tools he used were worn out from years of use. But Joe had something that couldn't be bought: a good heart. It was the middle of January, and the cold had wrapped itself around the town like a heavy blanket. Snowstorms were common, and temperatures dropped, so low that even the birds stopped singing. People stayed indoors, heating their homes with fireplaces and space heaters. But Joe kept working. Even in the biting cold, he showed up at his little garage, fixing cars for people who needed him. Before we jump back in, tell me, where are you watching this video from below? And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's episode is extra special. His truck was old too, a rusty red pickup with one working headlight and a heater that took 15 minutes to warm up. Still, he used it to help people. If someone's car broke down on the side of the road, Joe would go. If an engine refused to start in the cold, Joe was there, tightening bolts, checking spark plugs, doing whatever it took. But this story isn't just about Joe's kindness. It's about something else, something that happened one snowy evening that changed his life forever. That day, the snow had started falling early. By 3 p.m., the sky was grey, and thick snowflakes began tumbling from the clouds, covering everything in white. Joe had finished fixing a neighbour's van and was just about to close the garage when he noticed something strange. Out on the sidewalk, near the frozen alleyway, stood a woman. She wasn't wearing a heavy coat. Her clothes were thin, just a light sweater, jeans and shoes that weren't made for snow. Her arms were wrapped around her body and she was shivering. Joe frowned. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag, tossed it onto the workbench and walked outside. "Mom?" he called, stepping carefully over the snow. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, startled. Her lips were blue and her eyes had a distant, tired look. I'm fine," she whispered, but her body trembled as she spoke. Joe wasn't. Convinced. "You're freezing. Do you need a place to stay? Somewhere warm?" She shook her head, but Joe could see tears in her eyes. She was trying to be strong, but her strength was fading fast. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. Joe nodded slowly. "Well, I've got an old truck over there with a heater that works most of the time. It's not much, but it's warm. You're welcome to sit inside, just until the snow slows down." The woman hesitated. She looked at the truck, then back at Joe. There was a long pause before she finally whispered, "Thank you." Joe led her to the truck, opened the door, and helped her inside. He turned the key in the ignition. The truck coughed a little, then roared to life. Warm air started to flow through the vents, slowly fighting back the cold. He handed her an old blanket he kept behind the seat. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it should help." The woman took it with trembling hands. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she whispered again. Joe didn't ask questions. He could see the pain in her eyes, the way she curled into herself like she'd been hurt too many times. Instead, he said, "I'll make some coffee. You just sit here and warm up." Back in the garage, Joe boiled water on an old electric stove. He poured the hot coffee into a travel mug and carried it back to the truck. When he handed it to her, her hands trembled. "Here," he said softly. "This should help." The woman took a sip. Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Nobody's ever cared before." Joe gave a small smile. "You don't need to say anything, just rest." As the snow continued to fall, the woman fell asleep in the warmth of the truck, still wrapped in the blanket Joe had given her. The next morning, Joe found her still sleeping. He didn't wake her. Instead, he went back to the garage and got to work on an old sedan someone had dropped off 2 days ago. Around noon, The woman stepped out of the truck. "I should go," she said softly. "Where to?" Joe asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes lowered to the ground. Joe didn't push her. Instead, he offered her half of the sandwich he had packed. "Here, you can eat before you go." She took it with both hands. Her fingers were still cold. "Do you live around here?" Joe asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I was passing through, lost everything a few weeks ago. My job, my apartment, even my phone." Joe nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. That's hard." The woman looked at him, as if waiting for judgment. But Joe only said, "If you need help, I can ask around. Maybe someone's hiring." "I can't take advantage of your kindness," she whispered. "You're not," Joe said. "Sometimes people just need a hand, that's all." She smiled then, a small, grateful smile. "My name's Rachel," she said finally. "Nice to meet you, Rachel," Joe replied, shaking her hand. Over the next few days, Rachel stayed near Joe's garage. She slept in the truck, helped him with small tasks like sweeping the floor or handing him tools. And slowly, she began to open up. She told him about her old job working at a corporate office, how she had been laid off after a merger. She'd tried to find work elsewhere, but the bills piled up, and before long she was out on the street. Joe listened. He never interrupted or judged. He simply listened. One day, as they sat by the truck eating lunch, Rachel asked him, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Joe thought for a moment, then said, "When I was a boy, I was hungry a lot. My mom worked 3 jobs, and we still didn't have enough. One winter we almost froze, but there was this old man who lived next door. He'd bring us soup, bread, and once a pair of winter boots for me. I never forgot that. He didn't have much either, but he gave what he could." Rachel's eyes filled with tears again. "You're that man now," she said. Joe smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just doing what's right." A week passed, then another. Joe offered to let Rachel stay in the small storage room behind the garage. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and dry. He brought in a cot, a small lamp, and even found an extra pillow. Rachel helped him clean it up and made it feel like home. Then, one afternoon, Rachel came running into the garage with excitement. "Joe, look what I found." She held up a piece of paper. It was a flyer. "Hiring office assistant. Good pay. No experience needed. Apply within." Joe looked at the address. "That's not far from here." Rachel smiled. "I want to try." He nodded. "Go for it." Rachel, dressed in the nicest clothes she had left, fixed her hair, and walked into that office with her head held high. 2 hours later, she returned with tears in her eyes. "They gave me the job," she whispered. "I start tomorrow." Joe grinned. "That's great news." Rachel hugged him, and for the first time since he met her, she looked hopeful, like the weight on her shoulders had lifted just a little. A month passed. Rachel had a steady paycheck now. She helped Joe fix up the garage, bought new tools for him, and even painted the walls. Slowly, the garage began to look less run down and more like a place of pride. Then one day, she came to Joe holding a letter in her hand. "I didn't tell you before," she said, "but I'm not just an office worker. I used to manage finances. At my company, I understand business. I've been looking at your books." Joe blinked. "My books," she smiled. "Joe, you're an incredible mechanic, but you've been undercharging people. You don't even write down half of your jobs. I can help you. We can turn this into something bigger." Joe stared at her. "You want to help me build the business?" Rachel nodded. "Let me be your partner. You saved me. Now let me return the favor." And so, the garage transformed. Joe fixed the cars. Rachel handled the business side. They got new customers, built a reputation, and even hired another mechanic. But one snowy morning, something happened that would change Joe's life forever, again. Rachel handed him a letter and said, "Open it." He unfolded the paper. It was a deed to a brand new garage located on a busy road in town, fully paid for, in Joe's name. "I bought it," she said, tears in her eyes. "With the savings I had left. This is yours now." Joe couldn't speak. His hands shook. "Why?" he finally whispered. "Because you gave me warmth when I was frozen. You gave me hope when I had none. Now it's time I give you something that lasts." Joe didn't cry often, but that day he did. Joe stood in front of the new garage, holding the keys in his hand. The sign above the entrance read, "Joe's Auto and Repair. Honest work, honest price." It was surreal. Just months ago, Joe was fixing cars in a half-frozen garage with patched-up windows and borrowed tools. Now he stood on a newly paved lot, the smell of fresh paint still lingering in the air. The building was bright, clean, and stocked with all the equipment he had once only dreamed about. New lifts, digital diagnostics, tools, high-quality air compressors, organized tool drawers. But it wasn't the equipment that made Joe emotional. It was Rachel. She stood beside him with that same warm smile, the woman he had once offered a cup of coffee and an old blanket to on a freezing night. And now she had given him the world. The grand opening was quiet, just a small ribbon, a few neighbors, and a tray of cookies Rachel baked herself. No television crews, no loud music, just people who knew Joe, who trusted him, and who were proud to see him finally succeed. A local pastor even came by. "Joe," he said, shaking his hand, "you've helped so many people in this town for so long without ever asking for anything. It's about time the Lord sent someone to help you." Joe smiled humbly. "I never expected any of this. I was just doing what felt right." Rachel looked at him and said softly, "And that's exactly why you deserve all of it." As weeks turned into months, the new shop became a cornerstone of the community. Word spread fast. People said Joe was not just a good mechanic, but an honest one. In a world full of overpriced repairs and pushy upselling, Joe's Auto and Repair was a place people could trust. Rachel was at the heart of the business too. She kept the books in perfect order, handled customer service, and even offered free financial literacy classes for local teens every Saturday morning. One day, a single mother came into the shop, panicked. "My car won't start," she told Joe, holding her toddler. "I can't afford much right now. I need to get to work or I'll lose my job." Joe took her keys. "Let me look at it," he said. He worked on it for 2 hours, then handed her the keys back. "It's fixed." The woman's eyes widened. "How much?" Joe shook his head. "Nothing. Just pay it forward someday." She burst into tears. "Nobody does this anymore," she whispered. Joe smiled. "They should." But behind all this warmth and joy, Rachel held a secret, something she hadn't told Joe yet. It started with a letter. She received it one morning before Joe arrived. It came in a sleek black envelope sealed with wax. Inside was a simple message. "Rachel Sinclair, you are still the rightful heir. Your father's estate is waiting. It's time you return." Rachel folded the letter quietly and placed it in her purse. That evening, Joe noticed she seemed distant. "You all right?" he asked as they sat down for dinner in the back room. Rachel forced a smile. "Yeah, just a long day," but her mind was far away. She hadn't told him who she really was. Rachel was born into a wealthy family on the East Coast. Her father, Richard Sinclair, was a banking magnate who had built a fortune so large that their name was printed in the financial papers almost daily. But Rachel never cared about money. What she wanted was a normal life, a life full of meaning and connection, not boardrooms and empty parties. So she left. She moved far away, cut off ties, and built a life on her own. No trust fund, No credit cards, just her and the real world. But when she lost her job months ago, she had nothing to fall back on. Her pride had kept her from going back, until now. And now she had a choice. The next morning, she found Joe, organizing invoices. "Joe," she said quietly, "can we talk?" He looked up. "Of course." She sat beside him. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Joe listened. "I come from a wealthy family. My father owned Sinclair Bank. I walked away from all of it years ago because I wanted a life that was real. When you found me, I had nothing. I didn't want to go back. I didn't think I deserved to. But now they've contacted me. There's an inheritance. A large one." Joe didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," she said, eyes moist. "Afraid you'd see me differently." Joe gently shook his head. "Rachel, you helped me build everything. I don't care where you came from. I care about where you're going." 2 weeks later, Rachel traveled back east to attend a private meeting at her father's old law firm. When she returned, she held a briefcase. Inside was a check so large it made Joe speechless. "I don't want this for myself," she said. "I want to do something with it. Something real." Joe looked at her. "What are you thinking?" She smiled. "Let's open another garage, one that trains at-risk youth. We teach them how to fix cars. We help them get jobs. A place for people like me, like you, like who we used to be." Joe's eyes lit up. "You're serious?" "As serious as a new wrench," she laughed. They got to work immediately. With Rachel's investment, they bought an old warehouse downtown. It had been abandoned for years, broken windows, peeling paint, graffiti on every wall. But where others saw decay, Joe and Rachel saw potential. They named it the Lift Garage, Rise Up. They recruited local teens from shelters, foster homes, and juvenile rehab centers. Some had never held a wrench in their life. Some didn't even believe they were capable of learning. But Joe was patient. Rachel was kind. Together, they gave them something no one else had before, a chance. One of the first students, a 17-year-old named Malik, had been arrested twice. He had no family and slept in a car. Joe taught him how to rebuild an alternator. Months later, Malik was working full-time at the original shop. Clean, proud, and wearing a shirt with his name stitched on the front. "You saved me," Malik told Joe one evening. Joe shook his head. "No, son. You saved yourself. I just gave you the tools." 3 years passed. The Lift Garage became a national success story. Newspapers ran features about Joe and Rachel. They were invited to speak at schools, charities, and even at a White House summit for workforce development. But even as the attention grew, they stayed humble. Joe still fixed cars. Rachel still brewed the morning coffee herself. One snowy morning, as they stood together in the same old red pickup truck where everything began, Rachel said, "Do you ever think about that night? The night you offered me shelter?" Joe nodded slowly. "Every day," she smiled. "Me too." Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Joe blinked. "What's that?" Rachel opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring. "I was the one who was saved, Joe. And now I want to spend the rest of my life with the man who reminded me that warmth doesn't come from money. It comes from kindness." Joe stood silent for a long moment. Then he took the ring from the box and got down on one knee. "No," he said with a smile. "I'm the one who should be asking." They were married in the garage, under the bright ceiling lights, surrounded by students, mechanics, and neighbors. The same pastor who came on their opening day blessed their vows. And as they danced to an old country song, people laughed, cheered, and wept, because what they saw was more than love. They saw a miracle, a mechanic and a freezing woman, a cup of coffee and a blanket, an offer of warmth in the coldest of winters, and a life, no, a legacy that would keep growing for generations. The wind was cold again, the kind of chill that brought memories with it. Joe stood at the edge of his shop lot, looking at the road where he had once found Rachel walking alone in the snow. Back then he had nothing, just an old truck, some rusty tools and a heart too soft for the world he lived in. Now the world looked different, but deep down Joe was still the same man. Rachel had changed his life. Not because she gave him money, not because she helped build the new garage, but because she believed in him when nobody else did. That belief had grown into something bigger than either of them expected. Joe's small repair business had become a shelter for many. Every week more people came, people with old cars and broken stories, a single mother trying to keep her job, a teenage boy living in the back seat of a sedan, a war veteran who hadn't smiled in years. They didn't just need repairs, they needed someone to say, "You matter." Joe did that every day. He greeted every customer with warmth. He never rushed anyone out. If someone couldn't pay, he'd still fix the car and say, "You'll find a way, just don't give up." Some did come back to pay, others never did. But Joe never kept track. That wasn't why he helped them. Rachel had taken charge of the office, and her touch was everywhere. She made the waiting room feel like home. There were warm blankets on every chair. A pot of coffee was always brewing. Books for kids, soft music in the background. She didn't act like the daughter of a billionaire. She acted like someone who remembered what it felt like to be cold, hungry, and invisible. And she didn't just help with customers. She helped people find jobs, fill out forms, even get housing support. When Joe's garage got too busy, Rachel set up a small foundation, using her inheritance. She called it the Warmth Fund. It wasn't just about car repairs. It was about repairing lives. One afternoon, a young man named Marcus limped into the garage. His jacket was torn. His hands were rough. He looked scared. "My truck won't start," he mumbled. "I live in it. It's all I got." Joe took a look. The battery was dead. The alternator, worse. The belts were hanging by threads. It would take hours to fix, maybe longer. Marcus said, "I don't have any money, but if you give me a wrench, I'll work." Joe looked him in the eye. "You ever fixed a car before?" "No," Marcus admitted. Joe tossed him a wrench anyway. "Let's learn." That was the start of something new. Joe realized Marcus wasn't alone. So many people wanted to work. They just didn't have a chance. So Joe built a small corner of the garage into a training area. He started teaching basic repair skills. One by one, more students came. They learned, they grew, they got hired. Rachel expanded the fund. They added GED support, job referrals, soft skills classes, and soon Joe's small shop wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a school. It was a shelter. It was a second chance. But not everything was easy. Some neighbors didn't like it. They complained. "Too many strangers around," they said. "Looks like a shelter, not a business." One man even called the police when a homeless man sat near the garage entrance. Joe stood outside and said, "This man is my guest." My officer nodded and left, but the whispers didn't stop. "You'll lose customers," some warned. "You're attracting trouble." But Joe only shook his head. "I'd rather lose money than lose my soul." Rachel stood by him through every word of it. Things got harder when winter came. Power bills rose, the coffee pot broke, one of the lifts stopped working. Joe thought about closing early for the season. Rachel didn't let him. "We didn't come this far to quit now," she said. She reached out to donors, shared stories, made calls. The community responded. Volunteers showed up. A local church brought blankets. A woman donated a new heater. One man dropped off an envelope with $500 and no name. Rachel cried when she saw it. Joe just nodded. Kindness is louder than hate. Then something happened that no one expected. A national newspaper wrote a story about them. The mechanic who fixes more than cars. It went viral. People from all over sent letters. Some came just to shake. Joe's hand TV crews showed up. Big city reporters asked Joe to wear a suit for an interview. He laughed. "This flannel shirt is my uniform." Rachel stood beside him during the interview. When the reporter asked how it all began, she said, "Blanket, a truck, and a stranger who chose kindness." They were invited to open another center in a nearby city. Rachel was hesitant. "We barely managed this one." But Joe believed in the mission. "We don't need a big building. We just need big hearts." So they started slow, rented a small garage, sent Marcus to run it. Sent supplies, tools, and coffee pots. Soon the second garage was running on its own. Then a third opened, then a fourth, each one built by hands that were once empty, each one warmed by a story that began with frost. One night, Joe and Rachel sat outside the shop, wrapped in coats, watching the stars. Rachel asked, "Did you ever think your life would look like this?" Joe looked out across the lot, at the garage, at the glow of lights, at a young girl learning to change a tire. "No," he said quietly, "but I prayed it would matter." Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder. "It does." Trouble came again, though. A man in a suit visited the shop. He represented a real estate company. "This land's value is rising," he said. "We want to buy. Big money. You can retire." Joe said, "Not interested." The man left angry. A week later, they received a legal notice. The land was under review. Someone had filed a zoning complaint. A city hearing was set. Rachel was furious. "They want to erase all of this for profit?" Joe stayed calm. "Let's fight the right way." So they gathered letters, videos, testimonies. Rachel made a booklet titled "Lives Repaired Here" at E. The hearing, Joe didn't speak much. He just told one story, about the night he offered a blanket to a stranger, and how she changed his life. The room was silent. The board voted. The garage stayed. Rachel later said, "It's not just the repairs that matter, Joe. It's the way you make people feel seen." He smiled. "You saw me first." More years passed. The garage became a model for others across the country. The Warmth Fund became a foundation. Rachel trained people in every new town. Joe mentored every new mechanic. They never forgot the beginning. Never let success change their hearts. Joe still fixed cars himself. Rachel still made the coffee every morning. And on the door of every garage, carved into wood, were the same 6 words. "You're not broken. You're just cold." The snow came again. One evening, a woman showed up at the garage steps, soaked, shivering, carrying a backpack. Joe walked out with a blanket. "Need a place to sit?" She nodded. Joe smiled. "There's coffee inside." She followed him in, and just like that, the story began again, because Joe knew sometimes the smallest act becomes the biggest gift. The snow had barely melted when change knocked again. Not a loud knock, not a storm. Just a simple letter in a brown envelope with no return address. Rachel opened it. Inside, a single sentence. "The past doesn't forget, Rachel. But sometimes it forgives." No name. No explanation. But she knew who it was from, her mother. After all those years, after silence so deep it had become part of her breath, her mother had written. Joe saw her hands tremble as she held the letter. He didn't speak, just poured her a cup of tea and sat beside her. Rachel whispered, "I don't know what she wants." Joe said, "Maybe just a daughter." Rachel shook her head. "She stood by when he disowned me. She watched me walk into the cold." Joe looked into her eyes. "And yet, you came out stronger." They didn't speak of it for a week. Then one morning, a black car pulled up near the garage. Out stepped a woman in her 70s, wrapped in fur, standing stiff like time hadn't moved her. Rachel recognized her at once, her mother. She approached slowly, hesitantly. "Rachel," she said, her voice brittle. "I saw the article. I had to see for myself." Rachel didn't answer. Her mother looked around at the garage, at the kids learning, at the warmth radiating from the broken-down building. She whispered, "You built this?" Rachel said simply, "I became this." Her mother's eyes watered. "I was wrong," she said. "We all were. Your father, he wanted you to be strong, but he didn't understand what strength truly was." Rachel's voice cracked. "Strength isn't wearing a name. It's surviving without one." Her mother reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver locket. Inside was a picture of Rachel, young, smiling, taken years ago, and a note, aged and creased. It read, "Don't forget who you are." Rachel blinked back tears. "I remember now." Joe watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt. This was Rachel's moment. Later, when they sat together in the truck, Rachel handed him the locket. "She still kept my photo." Joe nodded, "because even broken families have roots." Rachel sighed. "But roots don't grow unless you water them." He smiled. "Then maybe this winter you start again." The seasons turned quickly that year. The Warmth Fund was now helping dozens of garages across the state. The model Joe and Rachel created was being studied by universities, praised in speeches, and copied in cities near and far. But Joe never stopped working with his hands. He still fixed the dented fenders, still changed oil for single moms, still tightened bolts for elderly drivers. He believed that if you stop touching the work, you stop understanding its value. One cold March morning, a girl named Emily arrived at the garage. She was 12. She had dark circles under her eyes and wore her backpack like armor. Joe noticed her sitting on the curb outside for 3 days in a row, watching the garage from across the street. On the 4th day, he walked over. "Car trouble?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No car," she said. "I just like the sound." "It's warm here." Joe sat beside her. "Where are your parents?" She looked away. "Gone." He didn't ask more. He didn't have to. "Come inside," he said. "You can help me sort tools." She followed. Emily became the garage's youngest shadow. She swept floors, labeled drawers, held wrenches during repairs. She rarely spoke, but always listened. Rachel made her warm soup every afternoon, taught her how to write invoices, how to count change. She didn't ask about Emily's story. She waited for Emily to offer it. One day, Emily whispered, "I used to sleep in the library, but it's closed now, so I don't know where to go." Rachel hugged her tightly. "You have a place now." They found Emily a foster family nearby, kind people who had once been customers at the garage. They'd lost a son to illness and opened their hearts again. Emily cried when she saw her new room. "Is it okay to be happy?" she asked. Rachel smiled. "Yes, honey. It's more than okay. It's your right." The impact of the garage was now undeniable. They started calling it the First Spark program, a training and shelter initiative that worked not just on cars, but on hearts, minds, and futures. Rachel managed the network. Joe mentored the youth, and together they became symbols, not of wealth or fame, but of hope born from kindness. Then came the biggest challenge yet, a fire. Late one night, an electrical short sparked in one of the storage units. Flames spread fast. By the time fire trucks arrived, part of the garage was gone. Joe ran into the smoke to pull out the oldest toolbox he owned. He came out coughing, clutching it tight. When the fire died down, ashes filled the air. Rachel, stood in tears, not for the building, but for the memories it held. But before dawn, the community showed up, one by one, with bricks, with shovels, with wood, steel, wire, former students, single mums, kids, elders. They rebuilt it with their own hands. No contractors, no big donors, just people. By sunset, the frame stood again. Someone hung a sign. "You built us. Now we rebuild you." Joe wept for the first time in years, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. When the new garage reopened, they held a small ceremony. Rachel spoke. "This place burned," she said, "but only the wood, not the mission, not the love." Joe added, "The strongest things aren't made of steel. They're made of second chances." Later that year, Joe got a letter. It was from a boy he'd once given a ride to, no name, just a ride and a sandwich. The boy was now in college studying engineering. "I still remember how you looked at me, like I mattered. You didn't ask questions. You just helped. I want to build machines that help people now, just like you." Joe folded the letter and placed it in his toolbox, right next to Rachel's locket. He didn't need awards. Letters like that were enough. More people came. More lives were touched. One woman brought her grown son, once in prison, now clean and working. Another brought her daughter who'd dropped out of school. Now she was back in class learning mechanics. And every time someone asked how it all started, Joe and Rachel gave the same answer. One snowy night, one blanket, one act of kindness. That winter, the garage started keeping its doors open all night. A warm fire, blankets, food, even if no one needed repairs. Because Joe remembered what cold really meant. He remembered the way Rachel had looked that first night. Lost, afraid. And he never wanted anyone to feel that way again. They grew old together, but never tired. And even as Rachel's hair turned silver and Joe's hands grew slower, their fire never faded. The garage remained, a place of healing, a place of love, a place where the world, no matter how cruel, could be softened by the sound of an engine turning over and a mechanic whispering, "You're safe now." The years passed quietly, but the work never stopped. Joe's hands had changed. His grip wasn't as strong. His knees clicked when he bent, and sometimes his back gave a sharp warning. But he still rose before sunrise, wiped his old coffee mug, and walked out to the garage with his same steady walk. The lot had expanded now, 3 bays for repairs, 1 full training room, and a waiting lounge that looked more like a small cafe. They still charged fair prices, still never turned away anyone who couldn't pay, and still offered warmth and kindness without question. And yet something was different in Joe lately. Not broken, just quieter, as if he was holding something inside. One morning, Joe was under a car when his hand began shaking. He dropped the wrench. A sudden coldness rushed through him. Rachel ran over, pulling him out gently. "You okay?" Joe forced a smile. "Just dizzy." But she saw through it. The color was gone from his face. His voice lacked its usual spark. That night, Rachel sat him down. "We need to get you checked." Joe didn't argue. The next day they visited the doctor. Blood tests, scans, silence in the white room. Then came the words neither wanted to hear. Heart failure. Advanced. Joe stayed calm. Rachel did not. "No," she said, shaking her head. "We caught it early. There are treatments. There has to be. Joe, you're not—" He took her hand. "I've been running on borrowed time for a while, Rach." She squeezed his fingers. "You gave that time to everyone else." The news spread slowly. Volunteers noticed Joe spending more time in the office. Students saw him watching more than working. But no one said anything. They followed his lead. Quiet strength, steady smiles. Rachel, however, changed everything. She expanded the Warmth Fund's medical support. She added free health checkups at the garage every Saturday. Partnered with clinics, trained more youth leaders. She refused to let the pain stop her from building. Joe watched her, and every day he whispered inside, "You saved me more than once." One evening, Joe asked Rachel to meet him on the rooftop above the garage. He had set up 2 folding chairs, a thermos of coffee, and a blanket. She laughed. "You, trying to recreate our first snowstorm," he chuckled. "No wind this time. Just stars." They sat together, watching the sky fade from gold to navy. Joe said, "You remember the first time I saw you? I didn't know your name. I just knew. You were cold." Rachel nodded. "You didn't ask questions. You gave me a blanket." He turned to her. "That blanket changed everything. You know why?" She shook her head. "Because before that night, I didn't think I had anything worth giving." Rachel blinked, tears away. "Joe, don't talk like this." He smiled. "I'm not saying goodbye. I'm just reminding you, every little act you gave became something bigger, and you've given more than anyone I know." She said softly, "You're my home." He nodded. "And you're my warmth." Over the next few months, Joe trained his top students more intensely. He handed over more responsibilities. He even gave his old wrench set, the one his father gave him, to Marcus, now a lead instructor. Marcus tried not to cry as he took them. Joe said, "Tools don't matter as much as the hands holding them. Keep those hands kind." Rachel received a call from a major city. They wanted to replicate the garage model, build 10 warmth centers across their metro area. They offered to fly her in, give her resources, teams. She hesitated. Joe smiled. "Go," Rachel said. "I won't leave you." Joe reached for her hand. "You're not leaving me. You're spreading me." While Rachel traveled, Joe stayed close to the original garage. He greeted new visitors, mentored with quiet presence, and spent evenings rereading old letters from people they'd helped. One of those letters caught his eye. It was from Emily, the girl who once sat across the street watching the garage from the cold. She was now 18, in college, studying social work. She had written, "You never made me feel like a problem. You made me feel like a person. I want to do that for others now." Joe placed the letter in a wooden box with others. "Like it." He called it proof of purpose. One night, Joe didn't show up for work. Rachel had returned from her trip and came looking. She found him in the truck, not slumped, not gone, just sitting still, eyes closed, peaceful, a note on the seat beside him. This truck was shelter. This truck was hope. This truck was love. If I go anywhere, I want to go here. Tell them I was never afraid, because I had all of you." Rachel pressed her forehead to his chest and wept. The news spread like fire. But it wasn't grief that filled the garage that day. It was silence. People walked in and placed flowers on the hood of the truck. Others left notes. One man dropped off a coat with a tag, "In case another Rachel ever shows up." They didn't close the garage that week. Instead, they opened the doors wider. Played Joe's favorite music, cooked his favorite chili, told his stories. One student said, "He made me believe in second chances." A woman said, "He gave me work when I thought I was useless." A child said, "He told me I mattered." Rachel spoke last, in front of the truck, in front of the people. She held up Joe's old flannel shirt and said, "This is not the end. This is the beginning Joe gave all of us. He didn't just fix cars, he fixed people, he gave us warmth. When the world was cold, and now it's our turn." They turned the truck into a symbol. It stayed right outside the garage, under a small roof. Every winter they filled the truck bed with coats, blankets, food, and supplies. The sign on the side read, "If you're cold, take what you need. If you're able, leave what you can. In memory of Joe, the man who warmed the world." Years passed, but the story never faded. Children grew up hearing about Joe. New mechanics started every month, trained in the same way. Rachel continued leading the Warmth Fund, now international. The first Joe Center opened in a country where winters were even harsher than his. Inside, every building was a mural of him, smiling, holding a wrench, wearing his flannel shirt, and beneath the mural, 6 words: "You're not broken. You're just cold." Rachel visited the truck every year on the same date. She'd sit in the driver's seat, drink coffee from his mug and whisper, "You still warm people, Joe." And she would smile, because even in loss, his warmth never faded, and his gift, his love, had grown into a fire that would never die. Time has a way of changing things. It softens pain, fades sorrow. But some stories never fade. Some warmth stays in the walls of a place. And long after Joe was gone, the warmth he gave continued to spread like ripples in still water. Rachel now stood as one of the most respected names in social engineering, not because of wealth, not because of fame, but because her heart remained the same. She still wore her old boots, still signed papers at a workbench, not a desk, still made time to teach a nervous teenager how to hold a wrench. And every single day, she passed by Joe's truck, now a permanent part of the garage's heart, still filled with blankets, still giving hope. The garage had grown into a national foundation. The Joe and Rachel network now operated in 70-plus cities with community garages, offering emergency shelter, vocational training, free vehicle repairs for low-income families, warm meals, and most importantly, second chances. But no matter how far the work spread, they always told the story of how it started. One cold night, one scared woman, one kind mechanic, and one blanket. Rachel had grown older too, her hair now fully silver, her steps slower. But her fire never dimmed. One day, a journalist asked her, "What do you think Joe would say, seeing all this?" She smiled gently. He'd probably scratch his head and say, "All this from one sandwich and a seat in a truck?" She chuckled. But he'd be proud. Quietly proud. The kind of proud that doesn't need applause. On the 25th anniversary of the original garage, they held a massive event. People came from across the country, former students, single mums once helped, kids, who'd grown into teachers and leaders. Marcus, now head of operations, welcomed them. Emily, now a youth mentor, shared her journey. There were tears, laughter, stories, and a moment of silence for the man who had started it all. Rachel stood last. She didn't speak from a stage. She stood beside Joe's truck, one hand on the rusty door handle. She said, "He never saw himself as special, but he made everyone else feel special. He taught us that cold can be more than just weather. It can be a feeling, a circumstance, a silence in your soul. And warmth isn't just heat. It's kindness, it's dignity, it's being seen. This garage is proof that one person's warmth can save thousands." Joe didn't rescue me that night. He rewrote my whole future. And now, we rewrite others. That night, candles lit up every center across the network, from Detroit to Denver, from rural towns to crowded cities. Thousands of people stood under stars, holding candles and remembering the old truck that never stopped running, the coffee mug that never emptied, the warmth that never went out. But the story didn't end there, because every year, more Joes appeared. A quiet mechanic in Kansas who kept his garage open during a flood, a former foster kid in Ohio who started her own warmth station, a single mother in Canada who taught car repair to refugee teens. Each one said the same: Thing. I read about Joe and Rachel. They made me believe I could help too. One little girl, no older than 8, came into the garage one snowy morning, dragging a red wagon filled with donated socks. She said, "I want to help the cold people." Rachel knelt beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Joey." She smiled. "Named after my grandpa." Rachel's heart fluttered. "Your grandpa was very kind." Joey nodded. "He said kindness keeps the engine running." Rachel hugged her. Smart man. Eventually, Rachel began writing her memoir, not for fame, but to preserve everything. The book was called The Truck That Saved Me. It opened with this: "I was frozen in more ways than one, and one man's kindness didn't just warm my body, it healed my soul." One day, years later, Rachel passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 87. In her hands was the same silver locket from her mother. Inside, still the photo from her childhood, and a note Joe had once slipped in there without her knowing. It read, "If ever you wonder if it mattered, it did. You mattered. To me, to them, to the world." They held a joint memorial. The headline in newspapers read, "Together in life, united in legacy, the mechanic and the girl who changed thousands of lives." The garage became a living museum, still operational, still welcoming, but also a space of history. Visitors walked through exhibits that showed Joe's original tool bench, Rachel's first grant application, letters from people whose lives had been changed, the original flannel shirt folded beside the truck, and every visitor was given a small card. On it were the words, "It starts with one act, one warm moment, be someone's blanket." And somewhere, in a far-off city, one winter evening, a young man was walking down a street. He had no home, no family, just a worn-out coat. As the snow began to fall, he noticed a building with soft orange lights and a sign that read, "Warmth Garage, all are welcome." He stepped inside, shivering. A woman smiled and handed him tea. She said, "You're safe now?" He asked, "Who started this place?" She pointed to 2 portraits on the wall, a man in a flannel shirt, a woman in a wool scarf. She said simply, "Mechanic and the woman he saved. They believed cold is temporary, but kindness lasts forever." The end.